The courtroom was silent as the young girl stood before the judge, her hands neatly folded, her gaze lowered like any other teenager caught in trouble. She wore a modest school uniform, her backpack slung over her shoulder, giving off the impression of someone far too young to be standing in a place like this. Judge Richard Lawson sighed, adjusting his glasses as he glanced down at the file in front of him. "Miss Adams," he said, his voice calm but firm, "you were found at the scene of an ongoing criminal operation. Do you understand the seriousness of this situation?" The girl, appearing nervous, nodded slowly. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, based on the evidence, we believe she may have had knowledge of—" But then, the girl did something no one expected. She lifted her chin, reached into her jacket, and pulled out something small but powerful, a police badge. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said, her voice calm and confident, "I think you've got this all wrong. You won't believe what happens next. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from and subscribe for more jaw-dropping, real-life inspired stories." Judge Richard Lawson's eyes narrowed as the girl flashed the police badge, her expression steady despite the tension that filled the courtroom. A murmur rippled through the audience, whispers spreading like wildfire. Had the judge really been looking at an undercover officer all along? He leaned forward, studying her face more closely. She looked like any ordinary high school student, petite, soft features, an air of innocence. Her brown hair was tied back into a simple ponytail, and her uniform, white blouse, plaid skirt, neatly pressed blazer, was no different from the ones worn by thousands of teenagers in the city. Yet the badge in her hand told a completely different story. The defense attorney, Marcus Reynolds, scoffed, shaking his head. "This has to be a joke," he muttered, smirking as he glanced toward the jury. "You're telling me this schoolgirl is actually a cop?" The judge ignored him, his focus still on the girl. "Explain yourself," he said, his voice measured. The Utia girl took a deep breath before speaking, her voice clear and professional. "My name is Detective Emily Carter, and I'm a member of the Organized Crime Task Force. For the past 7 months, I've been undercover as Sarah Adams, posing as a high school student to infiltrate an operation linked to Vincent Moretti's syndicate." The weight of her words stunned the courtroom into silence. Judge Lawson knew the name Vincent Moretti all too well. The man was a notorious crime boss, responsible for trafficking, extortion, and illegal arms dealing. His arrest had been all over the news, but what hadn't been revealed was how law enforcement had managed to get the evidence needed to take him down. Now, it all made sense. Emily continued, her grip tightening around the badge. "I was recruited for this operation because of my ability to pass for a teenager. Moretti's men were using high school students to move illicit goods, and the only way to get close was to become one of them." Reynolds let out a sharp laugh, leaning back in his chair. "So, what? You expect us to believe you went to prom, passed algebra, and did homework while investigating one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the city?" Emily's eyes didn't waver. "Actually, I did," she said simply. A ripple of amusement and disbelief passed through the crowd. Judge Lawson, however, remained serious. He had seen a lot in his years on the bench, but nothing quite like this. He turned his gaze to the prosecutor. "Did you know about this?" The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, this information was classified for operational security reasons. But Detective Carter's testimony is crucial in ensuring Moretti's conviction." Judge Lawson tapped his fingers against the bench, deep in thought. His mind flickered back to all the teenagers he had sentenced over the years, the ones who had fallen through the cracks, the ones who never got a second chance. And yet, here stood a young woman who had infiltrated the very system that had corrupted so many lives. Emily looked at him, sensing his hesitation. "Your Honor, I understand this is unusual, but I'm prepared to testify. I have evidence that can dismantle Moretti's network for good." The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. For a long time, Judge Lawson had believed that justice was a straightforward path, a world of black and white. But today, looking at the young woman who had risked everything for the truth, he realized that sometimes justice required someone brave enough to walk in the gray. He took a slow breath and nodded. "Then, let's hear what you have to say." The courtroom braced itself for what was to come. No one was prepared for the truth that Emily was about to reveal. The courtroom was dead silent as Judge Lawson nodded, signaling Emily to continue. She took a measured breath, her hand steady even as she stood in front of an audience that barely believed who she was. "I was assigned to Jackson High School, under the alias Sarah Adams," she began, her voice even. "The school had a history of students disappearing, dropping out, or being found involved in illegal activities. The police suspected that Moretti's men were using the school to recruit young runners, kids who wouldn't raise suspicion. My job was to blend in, gain trust, and find out how deep the network went." A murmur spread through the crowd. Some people nodded in understanding, while others still looked skeptical. A cop posing as a high schooler? It sounded unbelievable. Marcus Reynolds, the defense attorney, scoffed as he pushed back from the table. "So, let me get this straight. You expect us to believe that you went to class, made friends, and did schoolwork while taking down a crime syndicate?" He shook his head in mock disbelief. "Tell me, did you also attend the pep rallies and gossip at lunch?" Some members of the audience chuckled, but Emily didn't react. Instead, she met his gaze directly. "Yes, actually I did," she said, "because that was my job. And while I was doing that job, I gathered evidence that will put Moretti behind bars for life." The amusement in Reynolds' face disappeared instantly. Judge Lawson leaned forward, interested now. "Go on." Emily nodded. "The operation was bigger than we imagined. Moretti's men weren't just dealing drugs, they were using teenagers to transport stolen goods, move weapons, and launder money through small businesses. Kids as young as 14 were being pulled into this, some without even realizing the consequences." She exhaled, her voice growing harder. "I saw kids who thought they were just running errands get arrested. I saw friends who trusted the wrong people disappear overnight." Her voice dropped lower. "And I nearly became one of them." The tension in the room thickened. Judge Lawson's eyes sharpened. "Explain." Emily's hands tightened slightly at her sides. "After months of getting close to the main group, I was finally given an assignment. They told me to pick up a package from a local warehouse and deliver it. I played along, knowing it could lead me to something bigger. What I didn't know was that they had figured out who I was." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Emily's voice remained steady, but the memory of that night flickered in her eyes. "The moment I got to the warehouse, I knew something was wrong. The usual people weren't there. Instead, 3 men I had never seen before were waiting. They didn't say anything at first, just watched me." Judge Lawson leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. "What happened next?" Emily exhaled, slowly. One of them stepped forward and told me that I'd been doing a great job, that I was smart for a kid. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Then he asked if I wanted to make real money. Reynolds crossed his arms. And what did you say? Emily's jaw tensed. I said I wasn't interested. A smirk tugged at Reynolds' lips. And that's when they discovered who you really were. No. Emily's voice darkened. That's when I realized they already knew. The room fell into stunned silence. Judge Lawson's expression grew grave. How? Emily swallowed. One of them pulled out a file, my real file. Not Sarah Adams, Emily Carter. It had everything. My birth date, my training records, even my academy graduation photo. She exhaled slowly. They told me they didn't kill cops unless they had to, but if I wanted to walk out of that room alive, I needed to prove I wasn't a cop. A chill ran through the audience. Reynolds, sensing an opportunity, leaned forward. And how did you do that? Emily's eyes locked onto his. I punched one of them in the face. A shocked silence hung in the air before a few people chuckled nervously. Judge Lawson didn't react. That didn't make them suspicious. Emily shook her head. No, it made them respect me. They laughed. Said I had heart. Then they handed me a package and told me to deliver it. No questions asked. Reynolds smirked. And did you? Emily clenched her fists. Of course not. I had my team track the package. That's what led us to Moretti's headquarters. Judge Lawson studied her carefully. So, let me get this straight. You played along long enough to track the operation, even after they figured out who you were? Emily nodded. I had no choice. If I had run, they would have killed me on the spot. If I hesitated, they would have known I wasn't who I claimed to be. The room was deathly quiet now. Judge Lawson sighed, rubbing his temple. This is unlike anything I've seen before. Reynolds leaned back, shaking his head. You claim you were undercover, but you were standing in that warehouse alone, holding stolen property. If we didn't know your story, wouldn't you look just like any other criminal? Emily's gaze hardened. That's exactly the problem. Reynolds smirked. Excuse me? Emily turned toward the judge, ignoring the lawyer. Your Honor, I walked into that warehouse to take down a crime syndicate. But if the police had raided it that night, what would they have seen? She gestured toward herself. A teenage girl, standing in the middle of an illegal operation. Judge. Lawson's lips pressed into a thin line. He knew what she was saying. Too many times, kids stood in this courtroom claiming they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. But how many of them were telling the truth? How many of them were just, like her, caught in something bigger than themselves? Emily's voice softened. How many kids do you think we've already judged wrong? Judge Lawson let out a slow breath. For the first time in years, he didn't have an answer. The case was far from over, but one thing was certain. Emily Carter was nothing like she seemed. Judge Lawson leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the bench. The weight of Emily Carter's words hung in the air like a storm cloud. The courtroom had been full of disbelief just moments ago, but now, no one was sure what to think. Marcus Reynolds, the smug defense attorney, was the only one who didn't seem shaken. Instead, he chuckled softly, shaking his head as if the entire story amused him. So, let me get this straight, he said, standing up and buttoning his expensive suit jacket. You want this courtroom to believe that a 25-year-old detective went undercover, lived a full-on high school life, managed to infiltrate a criminal organization, and just so happened to be at the right place at the right time for a raid. Emily held her ground, her expression unreadable. That's exactly what I'm saying. Reynolds smirked, pacing in front of the jury. You claim to be an officer of the law, but let's go back to that warehouse incident. You admitted yourself that if the police had raided the place that night, you would have looked just like the criminals you were investigating. He turned, his voice dripping with sarcasm. So tell me, Detective Carter, what makes you any different from the others who get caught up in these so-called wrong place, wrong time situations? Emily's jaw clenched. That was exactly the point she had been trying to make. She took a breath, then stepped forward, her voice unwavering. I had a choice, she said. I could have walked away. I could have refused the assignment, but I didn't, because I knew that the kids at Jackson High didn't have that luxury. They weren't given a way out. Moretti's men recruited them before they even had a chance to say no. She turned to face the jury, her voice stronger now. Do you know what it's like to watch a 14-year-old boy be forced into running drugs? To see a girl barely old enough to drive realize she's trapped, with no one coming to save her? She shook her head. I didn't have the privilege of sitting in an office, reading reports about these kids. I sat next to them in class. I ate lunch with them. I watched their lives get taken from them. The courtroom was dead silent. Even Reynolds had stopped pacing. Judge Lawson's face remained unreadable, but something in his gaze had changed. Reynolds, clearly unsettled, forced another smirk. So you say, he shot back. But at the end of the day, you still stood in that warehouse. You still took the package they gave you. What if you had gone too deep? What if you had started believing you were one of them? Emily turned to face him fully, her eyes locking onto his. I never forgot who I was, she said. But that's what you don't understand. Most of these kids don't have that choice. She took a step forward, her voice sharp. You sit here in this courtroom, playing with words, twisting the truth to defend men like Moretti. But I walked those halls. I heard the desperation in those kids' voices. I watched the ones who tried to leave get beaten so badly they were too afraid to ever try again. Her voice dropped, steady and filled with emotion. You say I was playing a role, but those kids? That was their life. Reynolds opened his mouth to speak, but for the first time he had nothing to say. Emily turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I didn't come here today to defend myself. I came to make sure that Moretti and his men never have the chance to ruin another child's life. She exhaled, shaking her head. Because while we sit here debating legal technicalities, there are kids out there right now being pulled into the same cycle, and if we don't stop it, we're just as guilty. Judge Lawson inhaled deeply, his gaze unreadable. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure how to respond. He had spent decades on the bench, hearing excuses, listening to sob stories, watching kids claim they were victims. And yet, today, for the first time, he wondered how many of them had been telling the truth. He turned to Reynolds. Do you have anything else, counselor? Reynolds hesitated, then cleared his throat. Your Honor, my client, Vincent Moretti, maintains that this entire case is based on the testimony of a woman who, by her own admission, spent months pretending to be someone she's not. He spread his hands. How do we know she didn't cross the line? How do we know she isn't just as guilty as the people she's trying to put away? The courtroom tensed. Judge Lawson turned to Emily. Detective Carter, is there any evidence, solid evidence, that proves you never crossed that line?" Emily didn't hesitate. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. "This," she said, holding it up, "contains every conversation, every transaction, and every deal I witnessed firsthand. I wore a wire for months. I risked my life gathering every detail needed to take Moretti's network down." She handed it to the bailiff. "I could have walked away at any time, but I didn't, because unlike Moretti and his men, I made a choice to fight back." Reynolds exhaled sharply, his confidence cracking for the first time. Judge Lawson took the flash drive, then looked at Emily for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. "Detective Carter, I've seen a lot of things in this courtroom. I've listened to countless people make their case, claim they were innocent, swear they were doing the right thing. But I don't think I've ever seen someone risk everything to prove it." A pause. Then he exhaled and shook his head. "This court finds your testimony credible." The tension in the room snapped. Reynolds looked furious, but Emily didn't care. She had done what she came to do. Judge Lawson turned to the prosecutor. "Proceed with the case against Moretti." Then he looked back at Emily, his voice quieter now. "Detective Carter, I hope you understand that what you did was dangerous." Emily met his gaze. "I do, Your Honor, but I'd do it again." For the first time that day, Judge Lawson allowed the smallest of smiles. "I don't doubt it." And just like that, justice was set in motion. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Judge Lawson's ruling settled in like a thunderclap. The weight of Emily Carter's words and the flash drive she had handed over had changed everything. Moretti's entire network was about to be exposed, and the defense had lost its strongest argument. Marcus Reynolds, the defense attorney, sat, rigid, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. His usual smug expression was gone, replaced by something colder, calculating. He was a man who had spent his career twisting the truth, and now, backed into a corner, he wasn't about to lose, without a fight. He took a slow breath, smoothing out his tie before addressing the court. "Your Honor," he began, his voice carrying a forced calmness, "before we accept this so-called evidence as absolute truth, I'd like to call a witness who may provide clarity regarding Detective Carter's true involvement in this case." Emily's posture stiffened. A witness? She hadn't been informed about any additional testimonies. Judge Lawson's gaze flickered toward Reynolds, skeptical but allowing it. "Proceed." The courtroom doors swung open and a young man stepped inside. Emily's breath hitched. Ricky Morales. She felt the air shift, a whisper of shock rustling through the crowd as Ricky, one of the students she had grown close to during her time undercover, walked toward the witness stand. He looked uncomfortable, his hands stuffed. Deep into the pocket of his hoodie, his shoulders hunched like someone used to expecting the worst. Reynolds smiled like a man who had just played his trump card. "Mr. Morales, please state your full name for the record." Ricky's voice was quiet but firm. "Ricky Morales." "You attended Jackson High School, correct?" He nodded. "Yeah." "And you knew Sarah Adams?" Ricky hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding again. "Yeah, we were friends." Reynolds pounced. "And by Sarah Adams, you mean Detective Emily Carter, correct?" Another pause, then a slower nod. "Yeah." The audience stirred. Emily kept her expression unreadable, but inside her mind was racing. Reynolds turned toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, let me make this clear. A real student at Jackson High believed that she was one of them. Not a cop, not an investigator, just another teenager." He pivoted back to Ricky. "Tell me, Ricky, did she ever tell you who she really was?" Emily's stomach tightened. She already knew what Reynolds was trying to do. He wanted to paint her as someone who had deceived not just criminals but the very people she claimed to protect. Ricky fidgeted slightly, his gaze flickering between Reynolds and Emily. He exhaled, running a hand through his short, dark hair. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, he turned to Judge Lawson and spoke the words that changed everything. "She saved my life." The courtroom fell into complete silence. Reynolds' smirk faltered. "Excuse me?" Ricky sat up a little straighter, his voice gaining strength. "Sarah, Emily, whatever you want to call her, she was the only one who ever told me I could be more than just some kid running errands for Moretti's guys." His gaze locked onto Emily now, serious and steady. "She told me I had a choice, and if it weren't for her, I wouldn't be here right now. I'd be in jail, or worse." Emily swallowed hard. Judge Lawson studied Ricky carefully. "Did Detective Carter ever coerce you? Manipulate you into doing something illegal?" Ricky shook his head. "No. She gave me a way out." His voice sharpened as he turned toward Reynolds, anger flickering in his eyes. Something no one else ever did. The shift in the courtroom was palpable. Reynolds had been waiting for Ricky to cast doubt on Emily's testimony. Instead, the young man had done the opposite, solidifying her credibility in a way no one had expected. Reynolds opened his mouth, but for the first time, he had nothing to say. Judge Lawson let the silence settle before exhaling. "I believe we've heard enough." His gaze shifted back to Emily, his expression unreadable. "Detective Carter, your testimony remains valid, and from where I'm sitting, you did exactly what was necessary to bring a dangerous criminal to justice." A wave of relief washed over Emily. Moretti's men had tried to discredit her, but Ricky's words had solidified the truth. Judge Lawson glanced around the courtroom. "Court is adjourned for today. We will reconvene tomorrow to finalize Moretti's charges." He turned to Emily, his tone softer now. "Detective Carter, your courage is commendable. I hope you continue to fight for the ones who need it." Emily nodded. "Always." As she stepped away from the stand, Ricky met her eyes. "You meant it, right?" he asked. "That I still have a choice?" Emily gave him a small but firm smile. "Yeah, Ricky, you do." And with that, a future that had once seemed impossible finally became real. Emily Carter stepped out of the courthouse, the warm afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. The fresh air should have felt like relief, but instead, it only reminded her of the weight she was still carrying. The case was strong, Moretti was going down, but the work wasn't over. It never would be. Behind her, Ricky Morales followed, his footsteps hesitant. His hands were shoved deep into the pocket of his hoodie, his shoulders tense, as if he was waiting for reality to snap back and tell him this was all a mistake. Emily turned to face him, noting the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He had never been given a choice before. Now that he had one, he didn't know what to do with it. "So, what now?" Ricky asked, his voice cautious as if bracing for disappointment. Emily exhaled, folding her arms. That's up to you. The boy frowned, scuffing his shoe against the pavement. I don't know where to go from here. She studied him carefully. He was still young, too young to have already felt this lost. But she had spent enough time in the world he came from to know that some kids didn't get the luxury of planning their future. For them, survival was the only plan. Then let's figure it out together, she said finally. You don't have to do it alone. Ricky's expression faltered for a moment, like he wasn't sure whether to believe her. His whole life, promises had been made and broken. People had told him they cared, then disappeared when things got hard. But Emily wasn't like them. Before either of them could say more, a deep voice interrupted. You did good in there, Carter. Emily turned to see Captain Harris approaching, his heavy boots making a dull sound against the pavement. His presence had always been commanding, broad shoulders, sharp eyes that missed nothing, but today there was something else in his expression. Pride, respect. Moretti's case is locked in now, he continued. Thanks to your testimony, we'll have him put away for a long time. Emily nodded. The relief she expected to feel never came. Sure, the case was solid, but Moretti was just one piece of the puzzle. There were still so many kids being swallowed by the same system, kids who wouldn't have someone like her to pull them out. Harris's eyes flicked to Ricky. And the kid? Emily didn't hesitate. He's coming with me. Ricky blinked in surprise. Wait, what? Harris raised an eyebrow. That's not exactly protocol. Emily squared her shoulders. Neither was spending 7 months undercover as a high school student. The captain let out a slow sigh, then smirked. Fair enough. He looked at Ricky, his tone serious. You got people looking out for you, kid. Don't waste it. Ricky nodded, though uncertainty still clung to him like a shadow. As Harris walked away, Emily turned back. To Ricky. Come on, she said. First rule of figuring out your life. Never do it on an empty stomach. Let's get some food. For the first time, a small smile tugged at Ricky's lips. Yeah. Okay. They started walking, and for the first time in a long time, Ricky didn't feel like he was walking alone. Emily sat at the small desk in her apartment, staring down at a worn-out notebook. The pages were filled with scribbled notes, names, connections, everything she had documented during her time at Jackson High. Memories of moments that had changed her more than she had expected. She flipped to the last page where she had written something weeks ago, a question she had asked herself repeatedly. If we don't fight for them, who will? She let out a slow breath, closing the notebook. The job wasn't done. Moretti would be locked up, but there were still kids out there, still a system that failed them, still another case waiting for someone willing to fight for it. She had gone undercover to change lives, but in the end, it was her life that had changed the most. Emily sat at her desk, tapping her fingers against the closed notebook. The case was over, Moretti was going away, and Ricky had a chance at a new life. But the fight wasn't finished. It never would be. There would always be another kid falling through the cracks, another name added to a file, another battle waiting to be fought. She glanced at the clock. Late, but she wasn't tired. The weight of everything she had been through lingered in. The air around her, heavy but not unbearable, because she had made a difference. Not just in the courtroom, not just with Moretti's conviction, but with Ricky. With all the kids who had looked at her, not as a cop, but as someone who cared. A faint knock at the door broke the silence. When she opened it, Ricky stood there, hands in his hoodie pocket. "So," he said, a little unsure, "you really meant it? About helping me figure things out?" Emily nodded. "Yeah, I meant it." Ricky hesitated, then exhaled. "Okay, I guess I'll give this whole starting over thing a shot." She smirked. "Good choice." As she stepped back to let him in, she realized something. The mission hadn't ended when she left Jackson High. It was just beginning. Sometimes justice isn't about laws and convictions. It's about choosing to fight for the people who need it the most. Would you have made the same choices Emily did? If this story inspired you, share it, because the world needs more people willing to stand up and make a difference. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, real-life inspired stories. See you in the next one.